Welcome to the last lesson in the Linguistics section of Logic, Language and Information 1. In this lesson, we'll look at the logical connectives we've studied in the subject: conjunction, disjunction, the conditional, the biconditional, and negation, and the connection between these technical, precisely defined concepts given with formal rules like the truth tables or the proof tree rules, and the concepts we express in our everyday natural languages, like English. Let's start with a case of conjunction. Lots of people have thought that there might be a mismatch between the concept that has the truth table, which I'll call the ampersand for the moment, which is precisely defined in the truth table here, and the English word and. Does the ampersand really mean the same thing as and? And if you look at this truth table, does that show everything that there is to say about what and means? Here are some reasons to think that the truth table doesn't tell us the whole story about conjunction. If I say, we went out and had dinner, it would be very natural for you to conclude that we had dinner while we were out and not before. I'm saying something very different when I say, we had dinner and went out. It's very natural to think of that and as saying, and then, we had dinner and then went out. Then the two independent sentences, we went out and we had dinner, may say something about the order in which the event happens, or they may not. It really depends on the context in which those two sentences are used. Then, we could explicitly cancel any claim about the order in which the events happen by saying, we went out and had dinner, although not in that order, or maybe even we went out and had dinner, although not necessarily in that order. It's true that we went out, and it's true that we had dinner, and I'm not saying what order we did that in. This last fact, that you can cancel the claim about the order of the events, makes me think that the connection between and in English and the order of the events that are described involves implicature, not entailment. Let's see how this could work. If we look at Grice's maxim of manner and the edict to be orderly, which is the last one there, one way to understand this is that we're being helpful in our descriptions when we make the flow of presentation match the order of the events we're describing. After all, we piece together the scenes we're being told about in the order in which we're told them, and it takes more work to backtrack. If I went out before I had dinner, then it's true that I had dinner, and it's true that I went out, so literally speaking, I went out and I had dinner. It's kind of true, but it's unhelpful to be told it in that order. On this view, a conjunction P and Q has the same meaning as the conjunction Q and P, in that they're true in exactly the same situations, whenever P and Q are both true, just as the truth table says. But when it comes time to say one rather than say the other, we generally choose the one that matches the order of the events if they come in some order. Our listeners know that we'll generally do this, so they're prepared to jump to the conclusion about the order too, even though it isn't a part of what it takes to make the statement true. Now that's conjunction, and I think that's the easy case. The conditional is a much more difficult case of the mismatch between truth table meaning and the way that we use words. When I introduce people to the truth table for conjunction, nearly everybody nods and agrees that it makes some kind of sense. That's what and means. And when I introduce the truth table for the conditional, where a conditional is true except in the row where there's an explicit counterexample, where the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, many people find that very hard to accept. They think it's not the right answer for analysing if-then sentences in English. Now, one reason that people get hung up is that it's very, very strange to assert a conditional when there seems to be no connection between the antecedent and the consequent. It's okay to say that if the cake was poisoned, then the dog will die, at least if we suspect that the dog ate the cake. It's much harder to think of a scenario where it's appropriate to say that if the cake was poisoned, then the dog is a space alien from Alpha Centauri. But if the truth table for the conditional gives us an account of if-then, of when an if-then sentence is true, then both of these sentences are true in the circumstance where the cake wasn't poisoned, at least in the case where the dog won't die and the dog isn't a space alien from Alpha Centauri. So And so if the cake was poisoned, then 2 plus 2 is 5. That's also true, even though there seems to be absolutely no connection between arithmetic, the claim that 2 plus 2 isn't 5, and the state of the cake. The same goes if we change around the antecedent. If it's Monday, then the statement, it's Tuesday, is false. And the truth table tells us that if it's Tuesday, then the dog will die. It tells us that that's true because the antecedent is false. And that's really not a very reassuring thing to learn on Monday. If I learn on Monday that if it's Tuesday, then the dog will die, maybe I'll think my dog's only got a day to live. So perhaps we can use a Gricean maxim of relevance to rule these sorts of things out. We wouldn't say them if we had no ground for the connection between the antecedent and the consequent. And that seems to give us the right answer in each of these cases. But conditionals seem to be a bit more difficult than this. Let's look at a few cases even more closely. In the case of a false antecedent, we wouldn't say, if it's Tuesday, then the dog will die, when there's no connection between the two. We'd just say, it isn't Tuesday, and be done with it. That seems to be right. But let's look at the corresponding case of the disjunction. Either it isn't Tuesday, or the dog will die. The truth tables tell us that this disjunction has the same answers as the truth table for the conditional. And again, we usually wouldn't say this if we knew that it wasn't Tuesday. We'd just say, it isn't Tuesday, and be done with it. That's more informative. But I don't know about you, but I think that in that case, I'm much more comfortable with saying that the disjunction is true, even though I wouldn't say it, while I'm much less happy with saying that the conditional statement is true. The same goes in the true consequent case. In the absence of knowing somebody's schedule for poisoning cakes, I'm not going to say that if the cake was poisoned, it's Monday. Even if I actually know it's Monday, and so the truth table tells us that this conditional would be true because it's got a true consequent. Similarly, I'm not going to assert the disjunction, either the cake wasn't poisoned or it's Monday. We'd say the more specific thing, it's Monday. But looking back at these two statements, on a Monday, I'm inclined to agree that the disjunction is true, but it's not the kind of thing that you'd say because there's something more specific to say. But I'm much less inclined to agree that the conditional is true. Now this means that I think that despite the connections between the maxims and conversational implicature, I don't think that the truth table of the material conditional gets the meaning of if-then right in every time. But this is something where reasonable people disagree. Now, this theory of implicature is part of the pragmatics of language. This deals with how language is used and the way that context, what it is that we're talking about, what we've already said, what we know, etc., the way that this context contributes to the way that we use and interpret our words and sentences. Now, there are other puzzles about connectives that you could look at using implicatures and pragmatics. Or, in English, often seems to have an exclusive rather than an inclusive sense, and some people have argued that this is to be explained in terms of pragmatics. You can also see pragmatics in the way that we use the word but. It seems to have the same sort of truth table as the word and. Consider the choice between saying the sun is shining but it's cold outside over saying the sun is shining and it's cold outside. In both cases, the same thing is happening. The sun is shining and it's cold outside. But in the case of but, it sounds like you implicate that this second conjunct is somehow surprising or unexpected or distinctive in the context where we've just said the first. Now, using these tools from linguistics, we've been able to get a new angle on puzzles about logic. The propositional connectives account for a lot of the meanings of words like and or and not in natural languages, but there are aspects of the meaning and the way that we choose what sentences to use that are not given by the definitions in terms of truth tables. This is a place for pragmatics to help. Truth tables tell us when things are true, if the truth tables are correct. There's a great scope for a larger story about when we might choose one statement over another. And implicatures and the cooperative principle and Grice's maxims give us a few pieces of that larger story. And this is an area of active research and ongoing debate in linguistics and logic to this day. Now, that completes our introduction to some of the connections between linguistics and propositional logic. If you haven't completed the other application areas, take a look at some of these to see other ways that propositional logic can be applied.